The shuttle docked with a metallic clang that echoed through the corridor. Kim Ji-woo pressed his face against the window, watching the massive orbital station rotate slowly against the backdrop of stars. Galactic University of Advanced Sciences. He was really here. The station was enormous, built like a spinning wheel in space. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went from the docking ports. Through the window, Ji-woo could see creatures of all shapes and sizes moving through the transparent walkways. Some walked on two legs like him. Others floated, crawled, or moved in ways he couldn't quite understand. Ji-woo grabbed his bag and joined the line of students leaving the shuttle. His hands were sweating a little. He was nervous but also excited. How many humans got this chance? Earth had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago. Exchange students from his planet were still rare. The customs area was chaos. A massive blue creature with 6 arms was arguing with a security officer. Somewhere to his left, something that looked like living crystal was being scanned by machines. Ji-woo kept his head down and moved through the process quickly. His papers were in order. His student visa was approved. Within 20 minutes he was through. "Kim Ji-woo?" a voice called out. Ji-woo turned to see another human waving at him. The young man had a bright smile and was wearing a university jacket. "I'm Park Min-ho, your roommate. Welcome to Theta 7. Ji-woo felt relief wash over him. "Thanks for meeting me. This place is incredible." Min-ho laughed and grabbed one of Ji-woo's bags. "Incredible is one word for it. Overwhelming is another. Come on, I'll show you to our quarters. Fair warning, the room is small, but at least we have Earth-standard gravity in the human section." As they walked through the station, Min-ho pointed out important locations: the dining halls that served Earth food, the recreation areas, the medical center, the library, which was supposedly the largest collection of knowledge in the galaxy. Ji-woo tried to remember everything, but his mind was spinning. Their room was indeed small. 2 beds, 2 desks, a shared bathroom, but it had a window with a view of space, and that made up for everything. "So," Min-ho said, dropping onto his bed, "what classes are you taking?" Ji-woo pulled up his schedule on his tablet. Galactic History, Basic Quantum Mechanics, Introduction to Xenobiology and Advanced Interspecies Biology. Min-ho's smile disappeared. "Advanced Interspecies Biology? With Professor Veltar? Yeah, is that bad?" Min-ho sat up, suddenly serious. "Ji-woo, that's one of the hardest classes in the university." Professor Veltar is known for being extremely strict. Most students avoid his classes if they can. "I need it for my major," Ji-woo said. "Besides, how bad can it be?" "Bad," Min-ho said firmly. "The professor is a creche. Tall, insect-like, has multiple eyes and mandibles that click when he's annoyed. Which is often. He has this reputation for breaking students down in the first week. Last semester, 20 students started his class. Only 8 finished." Ji-woo felt a knot form in his stomach. "What does he do?" "It's not what he does exactly," Min-ho said. "It's how he teaches. He uses fear. He believes that if you're scared enough, you'll work harder. And he has this thing he does on the first day. A sort of tradition." "What thing?" Min-ho hesitated. "He brings his pet to class." "A pet?" Ji-woo relaxed a little. "That doesn't sound so bad." "Not a pet like you're thinking," Min-ho said quickly. "He keeps a Vrixgar." "Do you know what that is?" Ji-woo shook his head. "A Vrixgar is an apex predator from Krevnor. That's a death world, Ji-woo. One of the most dangerous planets in known space. These things are built to kill. They're the size of a large earth tiger, covered in scales like armor with claws that can cut through metal. 6 limbs, all equipped with weapons. They have multiple rows of teeth and can move faster than most species can even see." "And the professor keeps one as a pet?" "Tame, not really a pet," Min-ho corrected. "He's had it for years. Uses it to intimidate new students. Shows them what real danger looks like. Says it teaches respect for the subject matter." Ji-woo was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Has anyone ever been hurt?" "No," Min-ho admitted. "The creature is always restrained. Energy collar, reinforced cage, the whole setup. But just seeing it is enough to terrify most students. I've heard stories of people dropping the class immediately after the first lecture." That night, Ji-woo couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the stars outside the window. He thought about backing out of the class. There were other biology courses. Easier ones. Safer ones. But that wasn't why he came here. He came to learn. He came to push himself. And yes, he came because he loved animals, even the dangerous ones. Growing up, Jiwoo had always been fascinated by predators. He volunteered at wildlife rehabilitation centers. He read everything he could about animal behavior. His friends thought he was crazy for wanting to work with creatures that could hurt him, but Jiwoo understood something they didn't. Every animal, no matter how dangerous, had reasons for its behavior. Understanding those reasons was the key to everything. The next few days passed in a blur of orientation activities and getting lost in the station's corridors. Jiwoo met students from dozens of species. Some were friendly. Some were curious about humans. A few seemed to think humans were beneath them, barely worth noticing. Jiwoo ignored those ones. He also met Lee Nari, another human student studying medicine. She was in Professor Velthar's class too. Have you heard the stories? She asked him in the human dining hall, her voice low. About the Vrixcar? Yeah, Nari shivered. I'm terrified. I almost dropped the class, but I need it for my degree. I just keep telling myself that thousands of students have taken this class and survived. We'll be fine, Jiwoo said, trying to sound confident. The night before the first class, Minho tried one more time to convince Jiwoo to drop it. There's still time to switch to a different section. Professor Markesh teaches the same material and she's actually nice. I'm not switching, Jiwoo said. I want to see this Vrixcar. I want to understand what makes it dangerous. Minho shook his head. You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which, Jiwoo smiled. Maybe both. That night, Jiwoo did research. He looked up everything he could find about Vrixcar. Their hunting patterns, their social structure, their homeworld. The more he read, the more fascinated he became. Yes, they were dangerous, but they were also intelligent, adaptable, and surprisingly social within their own species. He found a comparison chart that showed Death World classifications. Earth was rated as Class 4, which meant moderately dangerous. Krevnor was Class 9, nearly the highest rating possible. The creatures there had evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill everything else. But Jiwoo noticed something interesting. Earth might be less dangerous overall, but it had something Krevnor didn't. Diversity. Earth had thousands of different predator species, each with different hunting strategies. Humans had evolved surrounded by danger from every direction. Maybe that counted for something. As Jiwoo finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling in his mind. Professor Velthar wanted to use fear to teach, but fear and respect weren't the same thing. Jiwoo had learned that lesson years ago. Tomorrow he would meet the Vrixcar. And he would show everyone, including himself, that understanding was stronger than fear. The alarm woke him at dawn. The first class was in 3 hours. Jiwoo got up, showered, and tried to eat breakfast. His stomach was doing flips. Minho watched him with concern. Last chance, Minho said. I'm going, Jiwoo replied, and he meant it. The lecture hall was built like an amphitheater, with curved rows of seats rising up from a central floor. But unlike any theater on Earth, this one was designed for dozens of different species. Some seats had different gravity settings. Others had atmospheric bubbles for students who breathed different gases. The ceiling was high and the space felt enormous. Jiwoo arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat in the middle section. He wanted a good view, but didn't want to seem too eager by sitting in the front. Other students filtered in slowly. He recognized the different species from his orientation materials. The massive, muscular Bronthar who looked like they could break walls with their bare hands. The crystalline silicates who refracted light as they moved. The Nefti, floating in their containment suits filled with the gas atmosphere they needed to survive. Lee Nari slipped into the seat next to him. I couldn't sleep at all last night, she whispered. Me neither, Jiwoo admitted. The room filled quickly. By the time the clock hit the start of class, every seat was taken.
Jiwoo counted roughly 50 students.
The air buzzed with nervous energy. Some students were talking quietly. Others sat in tense silence. One of the Bronthar, despite being nearly 3 meters tall and built like a tank, looked visibly uncomfortable. The lights dimmed slightly. A door at the bottom of the amphitheater opened. Professor Velthar entered. The professor was tall, easily 2.5 meters. His body was covered in a hard, dark green exoskeleton that gleamed under the lights. He had multiple compound eyes that seemed to look in several directions at once. His mandibles clicked together as he walked, making a sound like stones grinding. 4 arms emerged from his thorax, each one carrying different teaching materials. When he moved, his chitinous armor made soft clicking sounds. Welcome, Professor Velthar said. His voice was surprisingly smooth. though it had a strange harmonic quality as if multiple voices were speaking at once. To Advanced Interspecies Biology, I am Professor Velthar, and I will be your instructor for the next 16 weeks. He set down his materials on the desk at the front of the room. His multiple eyes swept across the students. Jiwoo felt those eyes pause on him for just a moment before moving on. This course is not easy, the professor continued. It will challenge everything you think you know about life, about biology, about survival. Many of you will fail. Some of you will drop out. That is acceptable. This field requires a certain type of mind, a certain type of courage. The professor began walking back and forth at the front of the room. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. In this class, you will learn about the most dangerous creatures in the known galaxy. You will study predators that have evolved over millions of years to kill efficiently. You will examine prey species that have developed equally sophisticated methods of survival. You will understand that nature is not kind. It is not fair. It simply is. One of the silicate students raised a crystalline appendage. Professor, when do we begin the practical examinations? Week 3, Professor Velthar replied. But before we can begin any practical work, you must understand something fundamental. He stopped walking and faced the class directly. You must understand fear. The room went very quiet. Fear is what keeps species alive, the professor said. It is the most basic survival instinct. Without fear, prey becomes food. Without fear, even predators make fatal mistakes. So before we study anything else, you must experience true fear. You must feel what it means to face a genuine threat. Nari grabbed Jiwoo's arm. Her hand was cold. Professor Velthar walked to a communication panel on the wall. For the past 7 years, I have kept a specimen from the death world of Krevnor. Some of you may have heard of this planet. It is rated Class 9 on the danger scale. The creature I keep is called a Vrixkar. It is an apex predator. In its natural habitat, it has no enemies except members of its own species. It is perfectly designed to hunt and kill. He pressed a button on the panel. I am going to introduce you to Sarak. He is my teaching assistant. The door behind the professor opened again. 2 automated platforms rolled into the room, carrying a massive metal crate between them. The crate was at least 3 meters long and 2 meters wide. Heavy magnetic locks secured it shut. Through the reinforced transparent panels on the sides, Jiwoo could see movement. The crate was set down in the center of the floor. The platforms retreated. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. A sound came from inside the crate. A low rumbling growl that Jiwoo felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. It was the sound of something big, something powerful, something angry. 3 students in the back row stood up and left immediately. No one tried to stop them. Sarak is 7 years old, Professor Velthar said calmly, as if nothing unusual was happening. He is considered young for his species. Full maturity comes at 12 years. In Vrixkar terms, Sarak is essentially an adolescent. This is important to remember. What you are about to see is not a creature at full strength. The professor approached the crate. He entered a code into a panel on the side. The magnetic locks disengaged with a sharp hiss. Remain in your seats, the professor ordered. Do not make sudden movements. Do not scream. Sarak can sense fear and it excites him. The front panel of the crate slowly lifted. Jiwoo leaned forward to see. The creature that emerged was like nothing he had ever seen. Sarak was massive, built low to the ground with a body that rippled with muscle beneath obsidian black scales. 6 limbs, each one ending in curved claws that gleamed like polished knives. The scales had a strange quality to them, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. But running along the creature's spine and down its sides were markings that glowed with a faint bioluminescence. Right now, those markings pulsed with deep red and orange colors. The head was broad and flat, with eyes positioned forward like a predator's. The mouth was partially open, revealing rows of serrated teeth designed to tear and hold prey. A long, muscular tail swayed behind the creature, tipped with what looked like a blade of bone. Sarak stepped fully out of the crate and raised his head, testing the air. The bioluminescent markings flared brighter. More students left. Jiwoo counted 7 this time. A Bronthar warrior, despite his size, was shaking in his seat. One of the Nefti's containment suits was fogging up with what might have been panic condensation. But Jiwoo didn't feel afraid. He felt fascinated. He watched how Sarak moved, the way each limb was placed with precision, the way the tail provided balance, the way the head swiveled, taking in the room. This wasn't mindless aggression. This was intelligence. This was a thinking creature assessing a new environment. "Sarak, attend," Professor Velthar said firmly. The Vrixkar's head swung toward the professor. The red in his markings faded slightly. "Sarak is trained to obey specific commands," the professor explained. He made a gesture with one of his hands. "Display." Sarak rose up on his hind limbs, suddenly towering at nearly 2.5 meters tall. He opened his mouth fully, revealing even more teeth, and let out a roar that shook the room. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of fury and power. Nari made a small noise and buried her face in Jiwoo's shoulder. All around the room, students were pressing themselves back in their seats, trying to get as far from the creature as possible. "Strike," the professor commanded. Sarak dropped back to all 6 limbs and lunged forward, swiping at the air with his front claws. The movement was so fast it was almost a blur. The claws whistled as they cut through the air. "Enough," Professor Velthar said. "Return." Sarak immediately stopped and backed toward his crate, though his eyes continued to scan the room. The bioluminescent markings slowly faded from red-orange to a duller amber. "This," the professor said, gesturing to Sarak, "is what evolution creates when survival is measured in fractions of seconds." Sarak represents millions of years of refinement. Every part of him is designed for one purpose: to kill efficiently. His scales can withstand small arms fire. His claws can pierce most known materials. His bite force exceeds that of any creature on 30 different worlds. The professor walked closer to Sarak, fearless. He placed one of his hands on the creature's head. Sarak's eyes half closed but remained alert. "But intelligence surpasses physical power," Professor Velthar continued. "Sarak could kill me in seconds if he chose. Instead, he obeys. Why? Because he has been trained. Because he has been taught that obedience brings reward. Because even the most perfect predator can be controlled through understanding." Jiwoo noticed something. When the professor touched Sarak, the creature's bioluminescent markings shifted to a blue-green color. The tension in Sarak's body eased. He was relaxing. "This is the lesson of our first class," the professor said. "Fear is natural. Fear is correct. But understanding allows us to move beyond fear. In this class, you will learn to understand creatures like Sarak. You will learn why they hunt, how they think, what drives them. You will learn that even the deadliest organism is simply following the rules that evolution has written into its very being." Ree went willingly, though his eyes continued to watch the students. Once inside, the professor secured the locks. The growling resumed, but quieter now. "Class dismissed," the professor said. "Your first assignment is to research the evolutionary history of predator species, from at least 3 different." 3 weeks passed quickly. The class had shrunk from 50 students to 28. Those who remained had grown somewhat accustomed to Sarak's presence, though most still gave the creature a wide berth. Professor Velthar had gradually allowed Sarak more freedom during lectures. The Vrixkar no longer stayed in his crate the entire time. Instead, he wore an energy collar that kept him within a designated area of the room. Jiwoo had become fascinated with observing Sarak's behavior. He took detailed notes about the creature's body language, the color shifts in his bioluminescent markings, the way his tail moved with different emotions. The professor had noticed Jiwoo's attention but said nothing about it. Today was different. Today was their first practical examination. "You will each approach Sarak individually," Professor Velthar announced at the start of class. "You will observe him from a distance of 2 meters for 30 seconds. You will then identify and document 3 stress signals in his behavior. This is a basic but crucial skill for any xenobiologist. Understanding when a creature is stressed, aggressive, or calm can save your life in the field." The professor gestured to Sarak, who was resting near his usual spot at the front of the room. The energy collar around his neck hummed softly, its blue light steady. "Sarak has been conditioned to tolerate this exercise, but make no mistake. He is not happy about being observed at close range. Read his signals carefully." Students were called up one by one in alphabetical order. The first student, a crystalline silicate named Kelri, approached nervously. She stood at the 2-meter mark, her crystalline body refracting light as she trembled. Sarak watched her with amber eyes. His bioluminescent markings flickered orange. After 30 seconds, Kelri retreated quickly and documented her observations. The pattern repeated. Most students could barely maintain their position for the full 30 seconds. Sarak's warning growl sent several of them backing away early. The Bronther warrior lasted the full time but looked relieved when it was over. "Nari," the professor called. Nari stood up slowly. Her face was pale, She had been dreading this moment since the professor announced the exercise. Jiwoo gave her an encouraging nod, but she didn't seem to notice. Nari walked down to the front of the room on shaking legs. She took her position at the 2-meter mark. Scific had been lying down, but as Nari approached, he raised his head, his eyes fixed on her with intense focus. Jiwoo watched from his seat, paying close attention to Scific's body language. Something seemed off. The creature's tail was moving in a strange pattern, twitching irregularly. The bioluminescent markings were flickering rapidly, shifting between colors without settling on any single hue. Nari was counting seconds silently, her lips moving. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. Scific suddenly rose to his feet. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Nari froze. Her eyes went wide with terror. Stand your ground, Professor Velthar instructed calmly. He is simply displaying. 10 more seconds. But Jiwoo was watching Sirac's markings. The irregular flickering was getting worse. The colors were wrong. They weren't the red-orange of aggression or the amber of alertness. They were chaotic, flashing between colors with no pattern. Professor, Jiwoo called out, standing up. Something's wrong. Sit down, Kim Jiwoo, the professor said sharply, his mandibles clicking in irritation. Do not interrupt the examination. But look at his markings, Jiwoo insisted. That's not aggression. That's distress. Professor Velthar's multiple eyes swiveled toward Scific. I have worked with this creature for 7 years. I know when he is distressed. He is simply establishing dominance over... Scific convulsed. His whole body jerked violently. The energy collar around his neck sparked, sending blue electricity crackling across the surface. Malfunction, the professor said, his voice suddenly urgent. He moved toward a control panel on the wall. Everyone remained calm. The backup systems will... The collar sparked again, brighter this time. Scific roared, a sound of genuine pain. He shook his head violently, trying to dislodge the malfunctioning device. With a final burst of electricity, the collar exploded. Fragments of metal and circuitry scattered across the floor. Scific was free, and he was hurt and angry. The lecture hall erupted into chaos. Students scrambled for the exits. Chairs were knocked over. Someone screamed. Nari stood frozen in place directly in front of the now unrestrained Vrixcar, too terrified to move. Sirac's bioluminescent markings flared bright red. His claws extended fully. He lowered his body into a hunting stance focused entirely on Nari. The prey that had been standing there, staring at him, triggering his instincts. Scific, stand down, Professor Velthar commanded, rushing forward. But the creature wasn't listening. Pain and instinct had taken over. Jiwoo didn't think. He just moved. He jumped over the row of seats in front of him and ran down the stairs. Students were pushing past him, trying to escape, but he moved against the flow. His mind was working quickly, pulling together everything he had learned about animal behavior, about predators, about fear responses. Scific was hurt. The collar had been shocking him, pinching his neck, causing pain. Now he was free, but he was still in pain, still frightened, and a frightened predator was the most dangerous thing in the universe. Jiwoo, no! Minho's voice called from somewhere behind him, but Jiwoo didn't stop. He reached the floor level and positioned himself between Scific and Nari. The Vrixcar's eyes snapped to him immediately. 600 kilograms of apex predator, designed by evolution to kill, now focused entirely on him. Jiwoo's heart was pounding, but he forced his body to remain calm. He knew what he had to do. Every instinct was screaming at him to run, but running would trigger the chase response. Running meant death. Instead, Jiwoo dropped into a crouch. He made himself smaller, less threatening. He turned his body slightly to the side, not facing Scific directly, which would be a challenge. His breathing slowed deliberately. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. Hey there, Jiwoo said softly. You're hurting, aren't you? That collar was hurting you. Scific growled, taking a step forward. His claws scraped against the floor. His muscles were coiled, ready to spring. Jiwoo didn't move. He kept his voice calm, almost soothing. I know it hurts. But you're okay now. The collar is gone. You're safe. Kim Jiwoo, move away from him, Professor Velthar said urgently. The professor had reached the emergency containment controls, but he couldn't activate them with Jiwoo so close to Scific. Not yet, Jiwoo said quietly. He slowly extended one hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. He held it low, not reaching towards Scific, just offering. See no threat, just want to help. Sarak's head tilted slightly. The aggressive posture wavered. His bioluminescent markings flickered between red and amber, unable to decide. Jiwoo had grown up around animals. Dogs, cats, horses, even some wild creatures during his volunteer work at rehabilitation centers. He had learned that animals, no matter how dangerous, all operated on certain basic principles. They responded to body language. They could sense fear, and most importantly, they could recognize when something meant them no harm. He kept talking, his voice a continuous low murmur. "You're a good boy, Sarak. I know that sounds silly, but you are. You're just scared and hurt. Anyone would react the same way." Sarak took another step closer. He was within striking distance now. One swipe of those claws and Jiwoo would be dead before he hit the ground. Professor Velthar was poised at the controls, ready to activate the containment field the moment he had a clear shot. But Jiwoo noticed something. Sarak's tail had stopped lashing. The aggressive tension in his shoulders was easing. The creature was curious now more than angry. "That's it," Jiwoo whispered. "Come here." "Let me see." Sarak leaned forward, his massive head coming closer to Jiwoo's extended hand. The creature's nostrils flared, taking in Jiwoo's scent. Hot breath washed over Jiwoo's skin. This close, he could see every detail of the Vrixkar's face, the depth of intelligence in those eyes, the precision of every scale and tooth. Slowly, carefully, Sarak pressed his broad head against Jiwoo's chest. The lecture hall, what remained of it, went absolutely silent. Professor Velthar stood frozen at the controls, his mandibles slack with shock. The few students who hadn't made it to the exit stared in disbelief. Jiwoo's heart was still racing, but he kept his movements gentle. He raised his other hand and so carefully placed it on Sarak's head. The scales were cool to the touch, hard as stone but smooth. "Good boy," Jiwoo murmured. "You're okay. Let me help you." He examined the area where the collar had been. The skin underneath, between the scales, was raw and burned. The malfunctioning collar had been shorting out for who knows how long, delivering painful shocks directly to Sarak's neck. No wonder the creature had been acting strangely. Sarak's bioluminescent markings shifted. The red and amber faded away, replaced by soft blue and green, colors Jiwoo had only seen once before when Professor Velthar had calmed the creature. Colors that meant contentment. The massive predator leaned more weight against Jiwoo, nearly knocking him over. The action was almost affectionate, like a large dog seeking comfort from someone it trusted. Jiwoo carefully examined the remains of the collar still attached to Sarak's neck. "Professor, I need to remove these fragments. They're still hurting him." Professor Velthar moved forward slowly, as if afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. "The release mechanism is on the left side. Press the red panel twice." Jiwoo found the panel. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with him. He pressed it twice. The remaining pieces of the collar fell away, clattering to the floor. Sarak let out a long breath, almost a sigh. The tension drained from his body. He remained pressed against Jiwoo, his eyes half closed. "How?" Professor Velthar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" Jiwoo looked up at the professor, still gently stroking Sarak's head. I treated him like he was hurt and scared, because that's what he was." Behind them, Nari finally moved. She stumbled backward and collapsed into a chair, shaking. Other students were slowly, carefully re-entering the room, unable to believe what they were seeing. Minyo appeared at Jiwoo's side, his face a mixture of awe and concern. "You absolute maniac. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Jiwoo said simply. He looked down at Sarak, who was now resting his considerable weight against him. "He's not a monster. He's just an animal who was in pain." Professor Velthar approached slowly. He extended one of his hands toward Sarak. The Vrixkar opened his eyes and looked at the professor, but didn't move away from Jiwoo. "In 30 years of working with dangerous species," the professor said softly, "I have never seen anything like this. Sarak has never shown this level of immediate trust to anyone, not even me." Jiwoo felt the weight of what had just happened settling on him. He had just done something incredibly stupid and incredibly dangerous. He had just approached an unrestrained apex predator from a Class 9 death world. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. Sarak lifted his head and looked at Jiwoo with those intelligent amber eyes. Then, in a gesture that made several students gasp, the creature rubbed his head against Jiwoo's shoulder. "The way a cat might. The way an animal shows affection. I think," Professor Velthar said, his voice filled with wonder, We need to have a very long conversation, Kim Ji-woo. Ji-woo nodded, still processing everything. His legs felt weak. His hands were definitely shaking now. But Serac was calm, peaceful, no longer in pain. And that, Ji-woo thought, was what mattered most. Professor Velthar's office was nothing like Ji-woo expected. He had imagined something cold and sterile, all metal and glass. Instead, the space was filled with plants from different worlds, creating a small jungle of alien vegetation. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing data streams and research papers. One entire wall was a transparent panel looking out into space. Ji-woo sat in a chair that had automatically adjusted to human proportions. His hands were still shaking slightly. The adrenaline from the incident in the lecture hall was wearing off, leaving him exhausted and slightly dizzy. Professor Velthar stood at the window, his silhouette dark against the backdrop of stars. His mandibles clicked softly. A sound Ji-woo had learned meant the professor was thinking deeply. The emergency response team has taken Serac to the veterinary medical center, the professor said without turning around. They will treat his injuries and ensure he has no lasting damage from the collar malfunction. The collar itself has been sent to engineering for analysis. Will he be okay? Ji-woo asked. Yes. The professor turned to face him. Thanks to you. If you had not recognized that he was in distress, if you had not intervened. He trailed off, his multiple eyes studying Ji-woo intently. The security footage has been reviewed by 5 different departments. Everyone wants to understand what happened. The professor pulled up a holographic display. It showed the lecture hall from multiple angles. Ji-woo watched himself jump over the seats, run down the stairs, position himself in front of Serac. He saw the moment when the creature's aggression shifted to curiosity, then to trust. Watching it from outside made it seem even more insane than it had felt in the moment. Do you understand how statistically improbable your survival was? Professor Velthar asked. A Vrixcar in distress is one of the most dangerous situations possible. Their pain response triggers hyperaggression. They attack anything that moves. Trained handlers have been killed under similar circumstances. I didn't really think about statistics, Ji-woo admitted. I just saw an animal in pain. The professor's mandibles clicked more rapidly. Explain to me in detail what you did. What made you believe you could approach him? Ji-woo took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. First, I watched his bioluminescent markings. You taught us that different species use different signals to communicate their emotional state. For Serac, the markings are key. When they were flickering irregularly, that wasn't aggression. That was confusion and pain. Professor Velthar nodded slowly. Continue. Second, I made myself non-threatening. I crouched down, made myself smaller. I turned my body to the side instead of facing him directly. In most predator species on Earth, a direct stare is a challenge. I avoided that. Your planet is Class 4, the professor said. Moderately dangerous. How does that prepare you for a Class 9 predator? It doesn't, not exactly, Ji-woo said. But Earth has something unique. We don't have one apex predator. We have thousands of different predator species. Big cats, wolves, bears, crocodiles, sharks, venomous snakes, spiders, even some birds. Humans evolved learning to read the behavior of many different dangerous animals. The professor moved to his desk and pulled up a data file. Earth's classification appeared in the holographic display, along with detailed information about the planet's biodiversity. I have reviewed your planet's records, Professor Velthar said. The galactic database shows Earth has remarkable predator diversity. But what caught my attention was something else. He expanded a section of the data. Your species has domesticated over 40 different animal species. 40. Most species in the galaxy have domesticated perhaps 3 or 4, if any. Ji-woo leaned forward to look at the data. He saw images of dogs, cats, horses, cattle, chickens, and many others. The most remarkable case, the professor continued, is the canine, the dog. An image of a wolf appeared next to an image of a domestic dog. 30,000 years ago, your ancestors took one of your planet's apex predators, the wolf, and turned it into a companion. How? We formed a partnership, Ji-woo said. It wasn't really domestication at first. Wolves and humans hunted the same prey. We shared food. Over generations, the wolves who were comfortable around humans had advantages. They got food more easily. Humans protected them. Eventually, we bred them to be companions. Now we have hundreds of different dog breeds, all descended from wolves. You took a creature designed to kill you. Professor Velthar said slowly, and made it love you. And you did this before you had advanced technology, before you had energy weapons or force fields. You did it with nothing but patience and understanding. Jiwoo had never thought about it that way. I guess we did. The professor pulled up more data. Images of cats, horses, and even dangerous animals like falcons and ferrets appeared. Your species has a pattern. You see a dangerous animal, and instead of running or killing it, you think, how can we become friends with this creature? Not always, Jiwoo said honestly. We've also hunted species to extinction. We've destroyed habitats. We're not perfect. No species is, the professor said. But this impulse, this instinct to befriend rather than fear, that is rare. Very rare. He turned back to Jiwoo. When you approached Serac, you were not acting on training alone. You were acting on 30,000 years of human evolution, on instincts your species developed by living alongside predators and learning to communicate with them. The professor pulled up another display. This one showed a creche, the professor's own species. My people are prey. Our evolutionary history is defined by running, hiding, surviving. We developed intelligence as a defense mechanism. We built weapons, then ships, then left our planet to escape the creatures that hunted us. When I look at a predator like Serac, every instinct in my body screams danger. Even after 7 years of working with him, I feel fear. Is that why you use him to teach? Jiwoo asked quietly. Professor Velthar was silent for a long moment. Yes, he finally said. I believed that students needed to feel that fear. That fear would make them respect the subject matter. That fear would keep them alive. His mandibles clicked softly, but I see now that I was projecting my own fear onto them. I was teaching them to be like me, cautious, distant, always prepared to run. He looked at Jiwoo directly. You showed me something different today. You showed me that there is another way. Not domination through fear. Not control through force. But understanding through connection. Jiwoo felt uncomfortable with the weight of the professor's words. I grew up around animals. My parents thought I was crazy for wanting to work with wild creatures, but I always felt like if you took the time to understand them, they weren't so scary. What animals did you work with on Earth? Jiwoo thought back. At the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, mostly injured animals. Birds with broken wings. A fox that was hit by a car. Once we had a wolf that was caught in a trap. I helped care for it while it healed. Everyone was afraid of it, but it was just scared and in pain. Like Serac was today. Professor Velthar pulled up another file. I want to show you something. This is the history of Rixkar interaction with other species. A timeline appeared filled with red markers. Each red marker represents an attack. In the 300 years since we discovered Krevnor, there have been over 5,000 recorded attacks by Rixkar on researchers, handlers, and soldiers. The fatality rate is 92%. Jiwoo felt his stomach drop. But Serac didn't attack me. No, he did not. In fact, his response to you was unprecedented. Look at this. The professor played the security footage again, focusing on Serac's face. His bioluminescent markings shifted to blue-green. Those colors indicate deep contentment, bonding, trust. I have only ever seen Serac show those colors with me, and only after years of conditioning. He showed them to you in minutes, and why? Jiwoo asked. What did I do differently? I have been analyzing the footage and your explanation. I believe it comes down to something simple but profound. You approached him without fear. I was terrified, Jiwoo admitted. Perhaps, but your body language did not show it. More importantly, you approached him with empathy. You saw his pain and wanted to help. Predators are intelligent. Serac sensed that you meant him no harm. More than that, he sensed that you cared about his well-being. The professor sat down across from Jiwoo. I have a proposal. I want you to assist me with Serac's care. I want you to help me understand what you did, how you did it, and whether it can be taught to others. I'm not sure I can teach it, Jiwoo said hesitantly. A lot of it is just feeling, reading body language, understanding what the animal needs. That is precisely what makes it valuable, the professor said. Science often focuses on what can be measured and quantified. But there is knowledge that exists in instinct and observation and empathy. Your species has cultivated that knowledge for millennia. I want to learn from you. Jiwoo thought about it. Working directly with Serac would be amazing, but it was also dangerous. Today had gone well, but that didn't mean it would always go well. I have conditions, Jiwoo said. Professor Velthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Name them. First, we work to improve Sarak's quality of life. Better habitat, more enrichment, treating him as an individual with needs and feelings, not just as a specimen. Agreed. Second, no more using fear as a teaching method. Students should learn to respect dangerous creatures through understanding, not terror. The professor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That will require me to change my entire teaching philosophy, to admit that my methods were flawed." "Yes," Jiwoo said simply. "Very well, agreed." The professor stood and extended one of his 4 hands. "We have a partnership, Kim Jiwoo." Jiwoo shook the professor's hand. The exoskeleton was cool and hard under his grip. "When can I see Sarak again?" Jiwoo asked. "The medical center will keep him for 2 days to ensure full recovery. After that, we will move him to a new habitat I will have constructed according to your specifications." The professor's eyes gleamed with something that might have been excitement. "We are going to revolutionize xenobiology education, you and I. We are going to show the galaxy that there is a better way." As Jiwoo left the office, his mind was spinning. He had come to this university as just another exchange student. Now he was working directly with one of the most respected professors in the galaxy, caring for one of the most dangerous creatures in known space. Minho was waiting in the corridor outside. "Well, are you expelled? Did he ban you from ever approaching Sarak again?" Jiwoo grinned. "Neither. He wants me to help take care of Sarak." Minho stared at him. "You're joking." "Nope. Starting in 2 days, I'm officially working with the most dangerous predator in the university." "You," Minho said, shaking his head, "are absolutely insane." "Probably," Jiwoo agreed, "but it's going to be amazing." 6 months had changed everything. Jiwoo stood at the front of the lecture hall, a datapad in his hand, feeling more confident than he had on that first terrifying day. The amphitheater was full again, not just with the students from advanced interspecies biology, but with visitors from other departments, guest researchers, and even a delegation from the Galactic Biology Council. At his feet, Sarak lay sprawled across the floor, looking completely relaxed. The Vrixkar's bioluminescent markings glowed a steady blue-green. No collar, no restraints, no cage, just trust. "Today we're demonstrating active trust versus enforced obedience," Jiwoo said to the assembled crowd. 6 months ago, Sarak was controlled through fear and force. He obeyed because he had no choice. Now he cooperates because he wants to. He gestured to Sarak. "Stand, please." Sarak opened one amber eye, considered the request, then smoothly rose to his feet. His massive form drew gasps from some of the visitors who had never seen a Vrixkar before. "Thank you," Jiwoo said, and Sarak settled back down. The keyword was please. The creature responded to respect, not commands. Professor Velthar stood to the side, his mandibles clicking with what Jiwoo had learned to recognize as pride. The professor had changed over these months. He smiled more, or at least his version of smiling. He lectured with enthusiasm instead of intimidation. Most importantly, he listened to his students. The traditional approach to dangerous species management focuses on control, Jiwoo continued. But control creates stress. Stress creates aggression. Aggression creates danger. We've broken that cycle by focusing on understanding and partnership. Lee Nari raised her hand from the front row. She looked completely different from the terrified student who had frozen in front of Sarak months ago. Now she was confident, engaged, even comfortable around the creature. "Yes, Nari. Can you show us the tooth examination technique again? I want to make sure I have it right for my practical." "Of course." Jiwoo knelt beside Sarak. "Hey, big guy. Can you show us your teeth?" Sarak lifted his head and opened his mouth wide. Rows of serrated teeth gleamed in the light. Jiwoo reached in carefully, running his fingers along the gums, checking for any signs of disease or damage. The creature remained perfectly still, trusting completely. A Bronthar in the 3rd row, the same one who had been shaking with fear on the first day, leaned forward with fascination. "How did you train him to allow that?" "I didn't train him," Jiwoo said, finishing his examination and giving Sarak an affectionate pat. "I showed him that it doesn't hurt. I was patient. I rewarded cooperation with things he enjoys, food, attention, enrichment activities. Eventually, he understood that I was trying to help, not hurt." Professor Velthar stepped forward. "This semester, our class has had 0 dropouts. Student satisfaction is at 97%. More importantly, Student comprehension of the material has improved by 40% compared to previous years. Fear is an effective motivator for short-term compliance, but understanding is superior for long-term learning. One of the council delegates, a floating nephtai in a containment suit, spoke up. Her voice came through a translator. This is impressive, but surely this approach only works with this specific creature. Sarek has been socialized with you for months. What about newly encountered species? Jiwoo exchanged a glance with Professor Velthar. They had been expecting this question. We've been testing that, Professor Velthar said. 3 months ago, the university acquired 2 specimens from a newly contacted world. Predators rated as highly dangerous. Kim Jiwoo was able to establish baseline communication and trust within 2 weeks. The previous handler had been working with them for 3 months with minimal progress. The professor pulled up footage on the holographic displays. It showed Jiwoo working with creatures that looked like a cross between a bear and a lizard, massive and armored. In the footage, Jiwoo used the same techniques: patient observation, non-threatening body language, and genuine care for the creature's well-being. The key, Jiwoo said, is recognizing that every creature, no matter how dangerous, has needs and feelings. They experience pain, fear, stress, and yes, even happiness. When you approach them with that understanding, everything changes. Another council member, a creche like Professor Velthar, spoke up. But your species is from a Class 4 world. These are Class 9 predators. How do you overcome the evolutionary advantage they have? Jiwoo thought about how to explain it. Humans don't have the evolutionary advantage of size or strength. But we have something else. We have 30,000 years of practice learning to communicate with creatures that could kill us. We took wolves, apex predators, and turned them into our best friends. We did the same with horses, cats, even birds of prey. It's in our nature to see something dangerous and think, how can we understand each other? That is insanity, the creche delegate said bluntly. Maybe, Jiwoo admitted with a smile. But it works. Minho, sitting in the back with some other human students, called out, "Tell them about the enrichment program." Professor Velthar's mandibles clicked with amusement. Yes, that is worth discussing. Kim Jiwoo redesigned Sarak's habitat completely. Instead of a simple containment area, it now includes environmental enrichment. Obstacles to climb, puzzles to solve, areas to explore. Sarak's overall health has improved significantly. His stress markers are at the lowest levels we've ever recorded for a captive Vrixkar. We also changed his diet, Jiwoo added. Before he was fed standard protein blocks. Now we provide varied food that he has to work for, like he would in the wild. It keeps his mind active and his instincts sharp.